The house looked ordinary in the winter dusk, a pale rectangle set back from a quiet French street, the garden asleep under a thin veil of frost, the curtains drawn against the cold. Neighbors would later say the evening felt like any other, that if you walked past you could almost hear a radio murmuring inside, a family settling in. A husband who left for Geneva every morning in a pressed shirt and returned after dark. A wife who waved from the doorway. 2 children who traced little fog halos on the car windows with their breath. The picture was so complete that no one dared imagine it could be false. Emergency lights ruptured that calm before dawn. Flames licked along the staircase and pressed their hot palms against the upstairs windows. Firefighters crashed through the door and found silence where noise should have been, a silence too heavy, too deliberate. As water hissed and wood split, the details began to rearrange themselves, as if the room were trying to confess. Family photographs lined the hall, smiling faces framed in gold. A briefcase lay open with nothing inside. On the kitchen table, yesterday's mail curled away from the heat, a stamp blistered like a small wound. He told everyone he was a doctor at the World Health Organization. He knew the right nouns, the right acronyms, the right distances between questions and answers. He wore his schedule like a shield, drove toward the border each morning, came back each night with the tired elegance of a man doing important work. People believed him because believing is how communities survive. They believed him because the alternative was unthinkable. But if you stand in that charred doorway long enough, something changes. The photographs stop looking like evidence of happiness and start looking like camouflage. The briefcase becomes a prop. The drive to Geneva becomes a ritual with nowhere to go. A life that seemed full reveals itself to be hollowed out from within, like a tree that only pretends to be alive until a storm touches it. This story does not begin with hatred. It begins with a man who built a life out of air and asked everyone he loved to breathe it. Sometimes the most dangerous lie is the one that promises you are safe. In the small French town of Prevessin-Moëns, near the Swiss border, Jean-Claude Romand was the kind of man everyone waved to. He was quiet, polite, intelligent, the sort of neighbor you'd ask for advice about insurance or medicine. To his parents, he was a successful doctor at the World Health Organization in Geneva. To his wife, Florence, he was a devoted husband. To his children, a gentle, loving father. Everything about him radiated calm confidence, the neat handwriting in his planner, the spotless car, the crisp shirts. He ironed himself. He attended family dinners, read bedtime stories, sent postcards from business trips, and never once raised his voice. But beneath that still surface was a void. Every morning, Jean-Claude put on his suit, kissed his wife goodbye, and drove toward the Swiss border. But he never reached the WHO building. He'd pull over at a rest stop, park, and sit for hours reading medical journals, newspapers, anything to look busy. Then, at dusk, he'd drive home and tell stories about colleagues, meetings, and projects that didn't exist. He was not a doctor. He was not an employee of WHO. He was, in truth, nothing at all. But people saw what they wanted to see, a quiet success story. And Jean-Claude understood something dangerous. If you look the part long enough, the world will play along. For years, his deception grew roots. He handled his parents' savings, promising to invest them safely in Swiss funds. He guided friends' finances with confidence. He told them the markets were slow, but returns were coming. And because he always appeared composed, they believed. He built an empire of lies not for greed, but to protect the image he'd already sold. A man of respect, stability, and intellect. Behind the facade, though, the pressure never stopped. Every smile was a calculation. Every dinner conversation was a performance. He had to remember who he had told what. Every name, every lie, 1,000 tiny details forming a world that never truly existed. And so, the man who appeared most peaceful in the neighborhood was, in truth, the most terrified of all. Because the longer you live inside a lie, the more truth begins to sound like a threat. By the early 1990 seconds, Jean-Claude Romand's world was nothing more than scaffolding, a fragile construction of words, habits, and forged routines. 18 years of pretending had turned him into a ghost inside his own life. Every morning he crossed the French-Swiss border, as always. He kept a briefcase full of blank paper and old WHO documents he'd found in public libraries. He had memorized floor plans, job titles, and acronyms so that if someone asked, his answers sounded effortless. He ate lunch alone in his car, then wandered around campus parking lots, head down, avoiding eye contact with the people who actually worked there. To the outside world, he was brilliant. Inside, he was nothing but an echo. At home, Florence began to notice the gaps, the missing receipts, the inconsistent stories. Their savings never grew despite years of investments. She found letters unopened, phone calls unanswered. When she asked simple questions, how was work today, who did you meet, his answers became shorter, colder, almost rehearsed. Meanwhile, the lies demanded more fuel. Jean-Claude borrowed money from his parents, his friends, even his mistress, always with the same calm assurance. Just until the Swiss fund matures, you'll get everything back soon. But the accounts were empty. The returns didn't exist. And the debt, moral, emotional, financial, was piling up like snow before an avalanche. He stopped sleeping. Some nights, he stood by the window for hours, staring at the dark trees that lined the property. He wasn't imagining escape, only silence. He began writing notes, shuffling papers, creating fake documents, as if by organizing the illusion he could make it real again. But even the best lies have expiration dates. Florence told him she wanted to see proof of his work. His friends demanded their money back. A meeting with WHO officials was approaching, one that could expose him completely. He was out of time, and in the corner of his mind, a single terrible thought began to grow. If the truth destroys everything, perhaps there should be nothing left to destroy. The day before the fire, Jean-Claude drove to his parents' house for dinner. They smiled, proud of their son, the doctor, proud of his life, his children, his success. He smiled back, a practice, empty curve of the lips. Underneath, his thoughts were as still and cold as the lake near Geneva. He knew the storm was coming, and he had already decided the world would never see him fail. January 9th, 1993. Akiet Saturday in Prévessin-Moëns. Snow fell softly against the windows, the kind of snowfall that muffles sound, making the world seem peaceful, forgiving. Inside the Romand home, Jean-Claude prepared breakfast for his family. Florence, still sleepy, poured coffee. Their children, Caroline and Antoine, laughed in the next room. It was a morning that should have been ordinary. But behind Jean-Claude's calm expression, something irreversible had begun. He had spent the previous night staring at a calendar, tracing the date with his finger. The calls were coming, the bank inquiries, the meeting at WHO he could never attend. Everything he built the lie that had become his life was hours away from collapse. He told himself it was mercy, that he couldn't bear to see them suffer the shame of his exposure. But the truth was simpler, darker. He couldn't bear to be seen. Florence turned her back for a moment. He struck. A single motion, clinical, detached, the kind of act done not in rage but in quiet desperation. Then he went to his children's room. No shouts, no chaos, only silence afterward. The kind of silence that feels like the world has stopped breathing. Afterward, he drove calmly to his parents' house, nearly an hour away. They greeted him with warmth, unaware. His mother prepared lunch. His father asked about the markets. Jean-Claude smiled, the mask still in place. And then again, the same terrible ritual. He kissed his parents, and even the family dog, then returned home. He arranged the scene like a man arranging evidence of his own disappearance. Pills scattered, papers burned, gasoline poured across the floorboards. He lay down, struck a match, and waited. But the fire betrayed him. It did not consume him. Rescuers found him unconscious, barely alive, surrounded by the ruin of everything he had claimed to love. When he awoke in the hospital, the truth came undone like a seam finally snapping. The investigators found no record of employment at WHO, no salary, no office, no degree. Every document he had ever shown was false. The house, the car, the trips, all built on borrowed money and belief. For 18 years, one officer said, he didn't just lie to others. He erased himself until the lie was all that remained. In the weeks that followed, France became obsessed. How could a man live 2 decades inside fiction? How could someone so calm, so ordinary, destroy his entire world rather than speak the truth? Jean-Claude Romand had finally become what he had always been, a man without identity, without past, without face. When the flames settled and the ashes cooled, the lies began to speak. Investigators sifted through what was left of Jean-Claude Romand's life. Charred photographs, empty notebooks, hollow bank accounts, and the faint outline of a man who had never truly existed. At first, Even the police refused to believe it. A doctor at the World Health Organization respected in Geneva, no criminal record impossible. But as they called WHO, as they checked the records, as they searched for his medical degree, nothing appeared. No diploma, no employee file, no trace of a man named Jean-Claude Romand in any professional register. It was as if he had been a rumor pretending to be a person. In custody, he was calm, disturbingly calm. He answered questions in a soft voice, with the same composure he'd worn all his life. He described his routine, the drives to Geneva, the hours in parking lots, the lies to his family. When asked why he killed them, he said, "I couldn't face them knowing who I really was." He spoke not like a man confessing to murder, but like someone admitting to a mistake in arithmetic. Psychologists called it pathological narcissism, a need so extreme to be admired that he'd rather destroy everything than be exposed. Others described him as a man addicted to illusion, a living void. One psychiatrist wrote, "He didn't kill his family out of hatred. He killed the witnesses to his emptiness." The trial began in 1996, 3 years after the fire. Journalists filled the courtroom. The nation watched as the man who once fooled everyone now sat in silence. Small in his gray suit, the mask finally gone. Survivors' relatives, neighbors, friends testified in disbelief. Each one repeated the same sentence. "Betrustet him." That trust had been his weapon. It was sharper than any blade, quieter than any gun. It allowed him to build an empire of lies, and when it fell, it buried everyone beneath it. The jury deliberated less than 6 hours. Life imprisonment, minimum of 22 years before parole. He nodded once, as if he'd expected it. As if, in a strange way, the sentence was a form of relief, someone else finally deciding the end of his performance. In the years that followed, he read the Bible. He told visitors he had found peace. He wrote letters of repentance. Some believed him. Others thought he was simply playing the final role in his long career of deceit, the penitent man, because for someone like Jean-Claude Romand, the truth was never a destination. It was just another mask to wear. In the years after his conviction, Jean-Claude Romand faded quietly from headlines, but not from memory. He became a presence that lingered not for what he did, but for what he revealed about the human need to believe. Even now, when people in France speak his name, they lower their voices. It is not just the story of a murderer. It is the story of a man who erased himself to keep a fantasy alive. In prison, he crafted a new identity again. He read philosophy and scripture, spoke gently to priests, told journalists he had discovered faith. Some saw humility. Others saw another mask. He described his crimes as a moment of blindness, a phrase so delicate it almost dissolved the horror. And yet, every word reminded the world that the line between truth and performance is thinner than we wish to admit. Writers tried to capture him, to decode him. In 2000, Emmanuel Carrère published L'Adversaire, The Adversary, a chilling reconstruction of Romand's life. Carrère concluded that Romand wasn't possessed by evil in the supernatural sense. He simply became the adversary to himself, a man whose fear of being nothing drove him to destroy everything. The book became a mirror for readers. How much of what we call ourselves is built to impress others? How many lies do we tell small, polite, necessary before one of them begins to live on its own? Years later, Romand was granted parole. He left prison a gray-haired man, quiet, almost invisible. He moved into a monastery-like community, helping the elderly, living under supervision. Some said he was redeemed. Others whispered that he had simply found a new stage, an audience that would believe in his transformation. The house in Prévesines-Moëns no longer stands. Where it once stood, there is only grass and a few trees that survived the fire. Neighbors still avoid walking past at night. They say sometimes, when the air is cold and still, you can almost hear a car door shut, a man leaving for Geneva at dawn, driving toward a life that never existed. He lived as a doctor, a husband, a father, a believer, but he was none of those things. In the end, Jean-Claude Romand proved that a lie can have a heartbeat, and that sometimes it beats longer than truth itself.